I wanted to start by asking, in an essay for the Human Rights Watch World Report 2015, which covers events worldwide from December 2013 to November 2014, its executive director, Kenneth Roth, reflected on a year so tumultuous it felt, and I quote, as if the world was unravelling, noting the rise of Daesh, the retreat of hoped-for gains after the so-called Arab Spring, the creeping frost of a new Cold War-style tensions in parts of the world. How he writes, seen many countries' view of human rights as a luxury for less trying periods. And so I'd like to begin by asking, how much of a danger is it that in all too many places human rights aren't centre stage? Baroness Lister.
Please call me Ruth. I think it's a big danger, and I certainly don't think human rights are a luxury for less trying times. I think they're a necessity, an absolute necessity for the most trying times. And the danger is that, and I think it goes back to what Maria was saying about our common humanity, because a human rights perspective really emphasises that, and it emphasises that over the various divisions. And what we're seeing at present in these kind of tumultuous events that we talk about is growing divisions. And those global divisions, the danger is that they're going to be recreated or reinforced within our societies, and there's going to be more kind of hatred, more pushing people to the margins, as Ed put it. And I think more discrimination, and it's partly, unfortunately, I think it's great you're having this festival, but unfortunately, particularly with our government, but and through, because of the great treatment in the media, human rights are not seen as a kind of positive force by many people in the society. So it's quite difficult to appeal to human rights to combat some of this, because it's seen as, I don't know, either, oh, it's all just make money for the lawyers, or it's for kind of groups we don't like. And so there's a kind of sort of tension there, and ambiguity, I think. But I think what's interesting, and I'm sure we'll probably come on to talk more about this, and I'm sort of wandering off your main question a bit, but I was just recently in Parliament at a meeting called by the Labour Campaign for Human Rights, and groups like Liberty and Amnesty were saying they're getting enormous support for their campaigns to defend the Human Rights Act. So I found that quite encouraging, that perhaps there is, despite the kind of the sort of media / government dominant refrains on this, that actually there is among many people an understanding, a certain degree of understanding, that human rights are very important. So to come back to your question, really, yes, I think they're more essential than ever in the kind of tumultuous times we're talking about.
Maria?
I think, so the question is why they're not centre stage in a lot of debates.
Yes, and
yes.
I guess, adding on to that, do people feel themselves, populations of countries, that, oh well, actually, human rights aren't all that important at the moment, we've got this big crisis going on, I shouldn't speak up or whinge or moan too much about that?
Well, I think that goes back actually to some of my earlier statements, is that human rights, they're an idea that are very popular with politicians and governments and the educated elites, but not with the common citizen. And I think it is only through public debate that we can make the cause of human rights more accessible to everyone. So we need to work on that, and certainly I don't think the media have been doing a great job. I don't see a great deal of discussion on proposals for a British Bill of Rights. There's some discussion, but not a lot of discussion. And I think going back to the idea of human rights is seen in some quarters as quite an elitist idea, something which is individualistic. So I think only through public debate we can make it much more accessible, and people will be able to relate to it. But there is some work to do, and I don't think the media will do that work for us. I think it's through grassroots movements and debates, that will happen. So what we need is a culture of human rights, a bottom-up culture of human rights, I think. But it's a problem. It's a problem.
Ed?
Well, whenever anyone says they want to repeal the Human Rights Act, and it's something you hear actually in party political circles quite often, particularly in, I've been a candidate in the elections for the Liberal Democrats, and I'm often in debates with people who are active members of the Conservative Party, and I often hear them say we want to repeal the Human Rights Act because it's not good for Britain. And I just, which article? Freedom of assembly and association, please go home now, this isn't right. The ability to marry who you want, when you want, the freedom of thought, freedom of education, the right to peaceful enjoyment of your own property. I think that's probably one of the most conservative values if I was dividing them. Which article is it you so object to? And actually it's only at that point that you discover that what they object to, or what I have found they object to actually, is the media report of a judgment they haven't read. And that's an unfair caricature, but I find it consistent with the conversations I have, that when you try and say which element of this Human Rights Act is so troublesome that it makes your life worse and repealing it will make my life better. The other thing, however, I think there is something quite simplistic about the way we approach, because actually I've done quite a bit of work in sub-Saharan Africa, and the majority of funding there from the Western world is in creating, and it's an odd language that we're not used to, but something that's called civil society. Basically a grassroots, bottom-up, non-government controlled discussion about what your life and your community could look like, and enabling people to achieve it themselves. When we were cheering on the fall of Gaddafi, and there was a discussion about whether or not to send arms to the rebels, I had a conversation with a very senior official at the Foreign Office saying, I'm slightly worried, just on a very, very, very personal level, that we're operating out of Benghazi. The last time I looked, that was the heart of radical, aggressive, fundamentalist religion. Benghazi is where the mosques are the loudest and the most aggressive, and sure enough, in no time at all, we don't have just the fall of a dictator, but we also have the rise of a civil war. And our approach is so simplistic. It's out with one and in with another, rather than an underlying understanding that actually all of the organisations that deal with this stuff on a day-to-day basis say it's grassroots is where you start and succeed, and when you've got overarching, as we have with the Human Rights Act, don't just say you don't like it. Think through what you prefer. I often say it's not what you've got that you should appreciate, it's what you haven't got you should be grateful for. So yeah.